My name is Sushil Gupta. I am the Executive Director of the Society. Welcome to the first plenary session for this conference. And our speaker today is Dr. Anne Robinson. Anne is the Chief Strategy Officer in Kinexus. She is responsible for advancing Kinexus strategic development to add continued values to customers. That's our focus. How do you keep your customers happy? Her team delivers the strategic roadmap, extensive thought leadership, as well as internal communications and change management. Recognized in analytics and digital transformations, is recognized all over the world, and has extensive experience managing supply chains for global organizations. Before her current role, Anne worked for Verizon, where she was responsible for the strategic vision of the global supply chains, driving excellence through analytics and process innovation. Even before that, Anne managed analytics and business performance teams for Cisco's supply chain. Anne is highly involved in our society, POMS society. She is the recipient of 2020 Martin K. Starr Excellence in POM Practice Award. As you know, that this award is an international award given to the best practitioner recognized in that year. And Anne has been wonderful. She was great when she was selected. She is a past president of Informs, a seasoned industry speaker. In 2021, she joined the Creative Destruction Lab as a supply chain mentor and as a PhD from Stanford University. And the topic of her presentation is very interesting. I'll tell you why it is interesting. The topic title is Inspiration, Credibility, and Trust, the Key Tenets for a Strong POM Ecosystem. It's interesting because I was looking at the title, Inspiration, Credibility, and Trust. If you pick up I, C, and T, it becomes ICT. And ICT to us is known generally information and communication technologies. So whenever we say ICT, we think of computer science, but now ICT could be or should be or would be a word in the POM dictionary. And welcome, and it's all yours now. You can start.
Thank you for that kind welcome. I feel so honored to be here. It's quite an esteemed audience to have an opportunity to share this message with. And maybe one of the other things that's worth sharing is how we landed on potentially doing this keynote. I reached out saying the doctoral consortium was not necessarily showing the practitioner side of our ecosystem. And could I spend a couple of minutes speaking with the doctoral students? And the response was, well, why not talk to everybody instead of just landing on the doctoral students? So I'm very honored to be here today. Thank you very much. I just wanted to talk a little bit about my career path, because I know many people say, how did you land as a strategy officer, as somebody who started with a PhD in industrial engineering and operations management, And the short path, or the short story there, was when I finished the PhD, I was very industry focused, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey along the way, but I started recognizing the challenges around the data and the data in support of the models. And the question came, well, if you're going to complain about the data, then you should own the data. So after I spent many years as a supply chain architect and in supply chain planning, I moved into a role responsible for all of the supply chain data. Well, I was not in that role a week when somebody said, well, if you're going to own the data, then you really need to own the metrics in support of that data. Okay. And the metrics that guide the performance of the supply chain. Well, it's all in well to talk about metrics, but if you have a responsibility for data and metrics, then that's going to go hand in hand with the strategy. And that was my first sort of foot into being part of strategic development and really focusing on strategy. From there, when I went to Verizon, it was really with the intent of driving strategy and creating strategy for a fairly nascent supply chain organization in the Verizon wireless side of the team. And from there, spent many years in many different seats, including running the Verizon wireless supply chain for some time before the opportunity arose at Kinaxis. And Kinaxis, just to tell people briefly who we are, because perhaps today is the first time you've heard the company name Kinaxis. We're a supply chain software company based out of Ottawa, Canada, and that's where I'm coming from today to speak with you. The company's been around since 1984, and I'm really honored to say that Duncan Klett, one of the founders, is actually a member of my team. He's one of our fellows and esteemed thought leaders, and still is engaged as perhaps the first day he was inspired to create the company. We really focus on the planning side of supply chain and looking at innovative ways of tackling planning in a different type of way. Our technology thinks not about the supply chain as a cascaded type of entity, but really as a concurrent one where you consider all of the dimensions at the same time. 1,300 employees. We have many global customers across 7 verticals. I know there are 6 columns here. Our 7th is retail. Anything above the dotted line was recognized by Gartner as a part of their top 25 supply chain. But a little bit of who we are and a few familiar logos there that you might recognize. But getting into the crux of the conversation, we are in uncertain times. Whether you're thinking about cybersecurity challenges, supply shortages, disruptions for lack of availability, unimaginable political issues happening in the world, this confluence of once in a lifetime events with a myriad of disruptions, there's no signs of slowing down. In fact, all of these headlines are from the last 24 hours, which is hard to imagine. And as you think about all of these different challenges coming together and causing this world of this constant disruption, constant challenge, the methods and the approaches and the thought processes that we've historically used are no longer going to be relevant. I really firmly and strongly believe that there is only one discipline with the breadth and depth of understanding of decision-making under uncertainty, really being able to make decisions faced with dynamic, uncertain times. And it's this community. It's everyone who's listening today. But it's not going to take working in isolation to be able to solve these problems that the world is facing. It's by all of us coming together and recognizing the strengths of the practitioner community and the academic community that we're going to be able to drive the creation of new ideas and effective applications so that we can really be the antidote and the solution that the world is looking for right now. This is me. I probably met some of you when I still look like that. I'm still wondering why I had a turtleneck on in California, but I guess it sometimes gets a little chilly. This was around finishing up my first few quarters at Stanford and freshly minted ideas. I came into the PhD program a little bit different than many of my peers. I had done a 2-year research-driven master's program at Waterloo prior to coming down to Palo Alto and basking in the glow of the late 90s Silicon Valley flare. And I came with ideas around where my research direction should be and where it should focus, and was really excited with the opportunities that lay ahead. Excuse me. And as I finished that first year, one of my mentors through encouragement and also through introduction, introduced me and helped me land an internship that first summer with a software vendor that was actually in Stanford Research Park, so right adjacent to the university. They were working on things very aligned with my areas of interest, my areas of research, and truly the application area that I was looking for. And bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, I started this new approach. Went into this internship very excited, and while I certainly enjoyed partaking in the free lunches of that era in the Silicon Valley, the experience was nothing short of a rude awakening. Nothing I had been working on academically was remotely related to the challenges they were facing. And conversely, their awareness of the advancement and efforts that were currently underway in academia were all but not. They had little awareness of what could actually accelerate and add value to the work that they were going right there. And I can remember almost coming away and going, oh, okay, this isn't going to work. What just happened? I've had so much energy and intent in this direction, and I've literally had my bubble burst. Well, no fear. I did go on to get the PhD, as you know, and I'd be remiss in this community not to give a shout out to my PhD advisor, who we all miss, Bob Carlson. And I wasn't dissuaded, and I fortunately had the type of personality that said, knowing I was targeting a career in practice, and I did know that pretty early on, I had right then and there a commitment to ensure everything I did had relevance and application in my academic pursuits, as well as innovation and application in my future industrial endeavors. And that became a personal passion of mine. And through the years, I've met others that share, and I'll share some of those stories along the way as well. But oftentimes when I have this conversation, I'm told, well, is that the professor of practice? Or is that the research scientist in industry? No, it's not. No, it's not. We all have a responsibility to engage in this ecosystem in a way that makes us all stronger, that a way that will allow the theorists to find the new niche method and idea, the empirical researchers to drive value, whether it's in an engineering school or a business school or, quite frankly, the economics department or physics. It doesn't matter. Every one of those angles, and whether you're sitting in a strategy role like mine, or you're a software engineer who's working on facilitating the next iteration, that awareness of each other, of our counterparts, is so critical. We all have a professional responsibility. And that responsibility is driven out of these tenets. Inspiration. Inspiration is the ability to drive mutual inspiration, to provoke research and relevance, to convert that inspiration into results that deliver value in the forms of methods as well as talent. Talent, we never want to leave talent out of this conversation. Credibility. What I'm really talking about here is to ensure that the validity of the results delivered in application, as well as the support for exploratory direction and deep investigation, ensuring that credibility. And when I say trust, and I had people say, well, aren't trust and credibility? Yes, but in this context, when I say trust, I'm talking about partnership. And it's not a two-way partnership. This is POM. We're a network. It's a network of partnerships. And that ability to enable our community to grow and prosper. So let's start with inspiration. Inspiration, we're really talking about finding your muse. And what is that muse? And can that muse arrive from a different part of the organization, from a different part of our ecosystem? Well, we certainly know that the field of operations research found its muse in applied problems. In fact, that's the root of where operations grew. That's where, whether you're talking about those initial, the work of Koopman under Philip Morris's exercises, or looking at the creation of LPs or dynamic program or queuing, these were all rooted in problems that had arisen that needed a solution that nobody had considered before. And that inspiration is what drew to the discipline expanding and growing and flourishing. The flip side of that, where you might see the opposite happening, where something like the AI winter that had caused a discern for things like neural networks and deep applications in AI, and really was thought to be a place where careers went to die. Well, and I'll say, it's a little bit true to my Canadian roots. The funding that was provided to the University of Toronto and a little bit in Montreal, and in the efforts to really attract researchers, saw Hinton, LeCun, and Bengio really focus on continuing to develop those computational methods for deep learning. And while, many people sort of scoffed at their thoughts and they were kind of labeled this Canadian mafia or this conspiracy, in 2012, there was a student that had such phenomenal results and blew away the ImageNet competition that it almost melted that AI winter overnight. And immediate applications started showing up in places like Google Photos, I think, is one of the attributed initial applications, or LeCun going to Facebook to start evolving the algorithms there. IBM's interest, Twitter has hired so many of these students. So this is a situation where we saw academia become the inspiration for industrial evolution, the industrial applications emerging and blossoming and getting value from new techniques. That inspiration doesn't stop there. And we need to challenge each other on, are we actually looking at new areas for inspiration? I had a conversation with somebody yesterday, and he said, I have a colleague who very proudly said to me, I wrote a paper that only 6 other people in the continent can understand. And I was like, oh, and was that a badge of honor or what? And I said, yeah, it really was a badge of honor. Well, does that actually help advance the ecosystem if there's no application and doesn't actually inspire somebody else to have new ideas and different thoughts and in a broader way? Or is it just, I said, well, it was a publication guarantee. So it was an interesting conversation. And over the last, within the last couple of years, it was Inform's 25th anniversary, and I had the opportunity to have conversations with a lot of my fellow past presidents, one of whom was Dick Larson, Dr. Q, who I know many of you know. And through the conversations with each person, one of them was looking at the fields, operations research, operations management, management sciences, as we look to the future. What keeps you up at night? And I will say this interview is worth looking up. And it's about at the 10-minute mark where Dick really comes alive and says, he's almost furious in his comments around, we need to figure out a way to inspire each other to take risks and be disruptive in our thinking so that we can collectively advance the profession forward. It's this merger of risk-taking, finding inspiration in disruption that allows us to look at things in ways we haven't before. You know what? Industrial partners will enable academics to explore perhaps in places they haven't before. And academic ideas and twists on classic problems are what industry is thirsty for, to be able to do things differently. So I love this quote from Professor Larson, because I think it's really indicative of the inspiration that we need to move forward. The next around credibility. And this is really that quality of being believable and convincing. And, one of my colleagues said, well, will that community really think that they need us to be convincing? And I said, well, I hope so. It's by adding that voice of credibility, that the work being completed is valuable and needed. But it's a two-way street. At Kinaxis, we've had the good fortune of starting to engage with some of this community in a different kind of way. And one more recently was with the new AI Institute for Advances in Optimization with Pascal van Hentenrijk. And this is a fairly, it was a large NSF grant that the Georgia Tech was awarded. And I immediately raised my hand and said, we want to be part of it. And through conversations with Pascal, and as he moved forward with the project plan of how this institute was going to evolve, he and his team had the foresight to come back to my organization and say, can you help define some of the relevant use cases from within the supply chain space that we could investigate as part of this institute? And so that idea of being able to have ideas and applications that were relevant to the direction of the institute allowed us to bring real world insight into the direction they were heading. Similarly, Morgan Swink, who I know many of you know quite well, he actually approached us and said, it's interesting what you're working on, and I'd like to understand more, and pursued some empirical research with some fantastic results. And, we started sharing these and sharing Professor Swink's research results internally with the executive team at Kinaxis, who said, wow, this is somebody who's looked at our data, who's looked at publicly available data, and is starting to see things in the model and the way we've approached supply chain that actually can show a differentiation. And that credibility, then we were able to share some of the notions of this research with our executive advisory board and beyond, with some of the investment community. Then it's probably one of the first times in the Kinaxis history that academically rigorous research with no engagement from us up to that point was showing the strength in the methodologies and the approaches and the algorithms, quite frankly, that we were bringing to the table. So credibility, being able to be each other's voice, each other's support, and showing the value of what we're delivering into our ecosystem can bring that believability and help advance us forward. And trust is my third tenet. And this is really around the power of partnerships. I'm not the first person to talk about this ecosystem by any means. And going back to my days as a grad student, I attended a Cores Informs conference, I think it was, or an academic conference of some flair, and had the good fortune of sitting next to Professor Art Jeffreyon. And I was positively starstruck, having just read his paper on generalized Bender's decomposition, and can I really be sitting next to this man? And he was very gracious and allowed me to be, the starstruck student that I was. But through that conversation and subsequently through the years, I realized that Art and I shared a passion around something else as well. And he called it the shared destiny of academia and practice, and the fact that they were inextricably linked. In 2014, he presented the ORMS ecosystem and spoke at length about the flows and needs of the different communities and how each one of these circles needed to be healthy and strong for this ecosystem to survive, to continue. With a call out to Chris Tang and Mohan Sadi, I know they took this work and then continued it on and published a lovely paper about it as well. Everywhere there's a needs in graduates, and I'm not entirely sure that those would be the words I would choose today, but each one of those connecting lines speaks to the power of partnership and the need for partnership. And this, I thought, was very reflective of the type of ecosystem in which I wanted to continue to thrive, that my colleagues wanted to continue to thrive, and my academic counterparts, I would hope, would want to continue to thrive. And Art isn't the only one. Laura Albert recently flagged this in her punk rock OR blog, a paper by Sid Hess and John Hall from 1978. ORMS, dead or dying, what's the prescription for survival? And as you read through, and this is a really interesting paper to dig up, but as you read through and you'll see towards the middle, they speak to steps aimed at engaging practitioners and faculty, and this notion around sharing of ideas, on ensuring that there is an explanation that They also spend some time talking about how the complexity of problems has increased, with this idea of being able to ensure that practitioners are engaged in the academic research with a level of understanding to be able to take it further. So if you think about our ecosystem, as practitioners, we need innovations. I want access to cutting edge ideas and innovations for considered application, whether it was in my prior role as a practitioner in a large company, or now working for a software vendor. This notion of having early access to leading innovations in academia is a hugely powerful tool. Step functions in knowledge and methods. Things change over time, new algorithms emerge. That's something that awareness is really important to a practitioner community, particularly as we see methods starting to evolve and fuse together. And certainly last but not least, around talent and mentorship. I think every single one of my customers asks me how to get the best supply chain talent. Where do they go? Can they partner with a university? Which ones are doing things that are most relevant to what they're focused on? This notion of engaging around talent. And then on the academic side, we're approached for ideas. What are those challenges? What are those concerns? What are those opportunities that might lead to an academic innovation that's novel? What data and access to that data can support? And then support. Let's not lose sight of financial support as well. These are really important in understanding the dynamics in our partnerships. So I'm very proud to talk about the fact that at Kinaxis, we did launch an academic program, a little bit fueled by the pandemic and realizing some of us might have been a little bit more attuned to virtual engagements than our academic peers. We raised our hands and said, can we help? Can we do a guest lecture or something like that? And it really turned into something maybe much more than I could have ever expected. We made 3 tenets to deliver rich and relevant content to help our academic counterparts transform their students into highly sought after talent, to enhance the curricula and bring supply chain practitioners into the classroom to inspire people to go into this discipline, and then to align with academic thought leaders on defining and supporting relevant, novel research that could then help evolve and change our discipline. In 2021, the team reached more than 3,000 students across 55 lectures and almost engaged every part of Kinaxis in one part of those lectures or another. We wrote 2 case studies with the 3rd on its way, thanks to Professor Burju Keskin, and who partnered with one of our customers for the case for women. So if anybody wants a supply chain case with a strong female protagonist, that is forthcoming as far as I'm aware. And more recently, we've embarked on a new supply chain game that we've aptly named the Kinaxis Cookie Game. And for any of you out there participating as guinea pigs in our dry run next week, I am thanking you in advance. I know there's a few of you out there, so thank you very much for that. But it's not just about us coming to you. We also want to make sure that this is a two-way communication. And this is only a fraction of where we started to engage. Thanks to those conversations with Professor Swink, we committed to a deeper relationship and really partnering with TCU, not just with the organization, but also with the large supply chain competitions that they're hosting. The Politecnico di Milano in Italy, around their new program, and the University of Singapore, and beyond that, working with Georgia Tech with App4AI. University of Alabama was one of the first ones to use our case studies. And in the coming month, I have the privilege of facilitating a conversation with 4 this community academic experts on the future of supply chain, given the times that we're living in. But this notion of being able to come together in as formalized partnerships, in informalized partnerships, and focus together on advancing the craft. So I'd be remiss not to take a moment and just talk about what it is I am seeing. Supply chain is a different space right now. there's this increased general public awareness. Well, I knew it was on the news and radio, and you can't go anywhere without talking about supply chains. But I went into my daughter's school and spoke to the grade 7s and 8s about supply chain because they wanted a female in STEM in a different career than, lawyer, doctor type of situation. And so I asked these, it's a girls' school. So I asked these girls, did they know about supply chain? And I was impressed with the comments around, oh, so do you know where my mommy's car is? And when are we going to get a new refrigerator? Even these children had an awareness and an understanding of supply chain, thanks to, everything going on right now. This is part of the common conversation. It's also not just a general public conversation, but it's the topic that has emerged at the most senior levels of organizations in a way it never has before. CEOs, boards are having conversations with their chief supply chain officers to say, what happened? How can we make sure this never happens again? There is recognition of the supply chain as a strategic differentiator, as having as much of an impact on the top line as the bottom line, and the conversation has changed. The CFO is now involved in the supply chain like never before. And that's a really important tenet to put in the back of your minds. And I'll come back to that. This unprecedented disruptions that I spoke about earlier have led to volatility on supply, the demand side, which we're familiar with, the supply side at perhaps levels that we've never seen before. And supply chain is recognized as more than cost driven. We are a tool for resiliency. We're a tool to mitigate risk. We are a tool and a recognition that with the expectations, we are the last point before engaging with the customer. So those top line impacts are really part of the supply chain mandate. But we are also part of the conversation when it comes to talking about sustainability or cybersecurity. Supply chains are seen as one of the critical elements in realizing sustainability objectives or protecting against cybersecurity challenges. And through all this, thank you, Amazon, customer expectations, whether they are personal or business, remain the same. I want what I want, how I want it, the way I want it. And I gave this talk recently on this, and another probably friendly of this community raised his hand and said, yeah, it used to be 30 minutes. And now there's a company in India that's saying 10 minutes or it's free. And I said, 10 minutes. Can you imagine the supply chain dynamics and the thought process that needs to go in to recognize 10 minutes to have the inventory, to have what I want, where I want it, how I want it in 10 minutes. I mean, this is a different world, but this is the current state of supply chain. So what I'm asking, the supply chain math is changing, needs to change. Where our hearts are settled on accuracy, and I'm still a believer that you want the as most accurate a response as you can get. We do not have the luxury of time. So how can we create our models to get as accurate as possible in as fast a method as possible? Supply chain, we as a team went through and said, well, what does this actually mean? What does it mean for this post-pandemic supply chain? Well, to be able to meet these expectations, we want our supply chain to be as intelligent as possible, as smart as possible, leveraging the best of the predictive and prescriptive toolbox, leveraging the likes of AI, ML, and other for your what ifs and simulations while using your optimization for trade-offs, but recognizing that your model is only as good as the data that's available in that moment. So how can we ensure that this data is as intelligent as possible? Immediate. Unfortunately, latency is no longer fortunately it's there, but this quintessential trade-off around inventory and information, the information is coming faster than ever before, and we need to be able to handle it so that we're managing things like inventory, things like availability in as little time as possible. Interpretable is an interesting one, and you go back to the Woolsey-Swanson rule that people would rather live with a problem they cannot solve than accept a solution they cannot understand. That is more important than ever when we're dealing with our customers and talking about the convergence, the fusion of optimization methods and AI, ML, and other heuristic methods. The question is, what does it mean and why should I care? How do I understand it? And that understanding is not just for that one of your top students who happens to be working at company ABC, it needs to be inclusive to that broader group. And guess what? That group now includes people like the CFO and the CEO, which it never did before. So how do we ensure that conversation and that interpretation and understanding is available to everybody? And last but not least, it can't be done in the absence of impact. We really need to understand across that supply chain network, what does that mean? What is it going to mean, not just for me in my node in this supply chain, but what does it mean downstream? What does it mean upstream? Valuable information is delivered. So a colleague for me spent some time working in the healthcare space, and she always reminds me, there's so much happens in the healthcare arena when it comes to OR modeling, and so little of it is actually used in practice. And part of it is that this notion of being able to understand the practitioner side, understand the academic prowess. These translators are needed, this understanding. And the more as a community we're sharing and interpreting and understanding, the more we're going to see that application in areas where it's never been considered before, or where it's been very nascent in its application, because there's inspiration to apply, there's credibility that it works, and there's trust that if something doesn't work, you're going to be there to help me bring it to fruition. And that translated mechanism, that storyteller, that element of being able to bring these models to relevance should not be underestimated. So as you think about your students, I want you to think about this as the supply chain roles are really changing. It's a different world than the one that certainly that I grew up in. The term citizen data scientist started flying around a few years ago out of Gartner, and I've sort of copied it and added supply chain to the front of it, because I really feel this is your master's students. This is who they need to be the moment they step out of your programs. This is maybe your PhD going into industry, the other skills they've forgotten to consider. They need to know you need to know your domain. Whether you're coming in as a supply chain operator type level, or if you're coming in, as a planner, or you're coming in as a supply chain architect, you need to know the domain. So understanding the models, understanding how they work. Do you need to necessarily build them? Not necessarily, depending on what role you're going into. So understanding that supply chain domain, understanding the analytics behind it. The very simple story, but when I first started one of my roles in my career, there was a solution in play, and nobody was using the models, and I couldn't understand. They invested in the software, they tuned the models, and they were still checking every single output as they went through. Well, what had happened was nobody realized that a normality assumption is needed for some of these models to actually work. And there were significant divisions by zero. So divisions by zero was causing the model to spit out junk. So one junky number means they're all junky numbers, and every single plan for every single product was being reviewed. And this was a simple case where the analytical assumptions were misunderstood, or there wasn't a depth of understanding. And had that been tweaked, and certainly we very quickly thereafter changed the situation, but that awareness and that analytical understanding was so important. I don't know how much time, energy, and frustration was felt as a result of that, but it was significant. And then the other two here are equally as important. Business strategy. We talked about the speed of business, the speed of expectations. So the supply chain professional, the supply chain citizen data scientist needs to understand, how does marketing come into play? How does the sales engine? We plan a supply chain at a certain price expectation. So that understanding needs to be part of the discussion. The financial acumen and understanding what this means from a top line of an of a financial sheet, not just as a cost center where we've been traditionally anchored, is more important than ever. And then the last line here, and particularly I'm going to do a call out around change management. I had no idea what change management was when I started my career as a professional. I might have heard the words, but certainly wasn't aware that it was a science, that the human change is a discipline in and of itself. In addition to my PhD from Stanford, and I will say I'm probably one of the few that have used every single piece of my PhD in practice, change management, the science of change, understanding how people interpret, want to go down a change path and actually start doing something different, has been one of the most important skills I've acquired. And so if there's one thing you're going to add to your curriculum, I would please tell you to add that one. So that is the face. That is the new supply chain professional. That is where your students are starting on day one when they go into that organization as a supply chain planner. This is the expectations of them. So as I come to a close today, I want to remind everybody that inspiration, we need to inspire each other. It delivers ideas, motivation, and value, not just for new methods and new application and maybe new avenues of exploration, but also from a talent perspective. Oh, I see a little typo here, but credibility delivers believability. This idea that we're able to deliver credible solutions, credible, that are going to support what we need to understand. Trust delivers a strong partnership, and certainly communities like POMS, like others, facilitate our ecosystem to flourish. I know this woman is no stranger to any of you, and with her permission, I use this slide frequently when I talk to a lot of my counterparts about my professional counterparts around when to use AI ML and to not get it's not the silver bullet and whatnot. But as I was preparing for this talk, I realized this quote may be equally valuable in this circumstance. And I will, thank Nada for letting me take some liberties as far as this quote is concerned. So I would say POMS has to be linked together, both horizontally and vertically, so that the entity operates as one. Practitioners, academics, and students have to be linked in such a way to not be highly efficient silos, but still silos. We need to work together to have a higher purpose, common vision. That's the key. So as we finish today, I'm going to say, as a practitioner, I ask my academic counterparts, consider me and my peers in your academic pursuits. Let us inspire you with ideas and support your results, and in turn, we'll be inspired to try new methods and new ways to ascertain new value and hopefully hire some of that talent you're also inspiring, and leverage your research and results to bring credibility to ours. It's through that collective that our ecosystem flourishes. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. This was wonderful. A great presentation. It's very inspirational, the talk which you gave, and all of us will follow your advice, if I can say it is advice, but the recommendations which you have made. And thank you for making an offer to our community that we can always approach and have ties with you and maybe come up with some joint projects, research projects. And I'm sure you are prepared to take a few questions
Absolutely.
from the audience.
Yes.
So the floor is open now. Rakesh, can you moderate it? And if there are any questions, whether on the chat or people can ask questions, raise their hands and can ask questions.
Please unmute yourself and you can ask your questions. see one hand. Yeah, Douglas.
Okay. Yes. And thank you. That was an excellent presentation. I really appreciate it. My question has to do with MBAs. What role do you see them playing? Because I think in some ways, operations management, at least at our institution, we've left a fair amount on the table. So if you could comment on that, I would appreciate it.
Yeah, I think everybody has a role. Like and which institution, sorry, Douglas, are you from?
I'm from the University of Texas at Austin.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks for your question. I think there are varying degrees of interpretation and application. And certainly if somebody has a propensity for supply chain, even those introductory starting to understand about supply chain becomes very relevant. And quite frankly, I think every financial program should touch on supply chain in some way, shape, or form. Our customers are really, the conversation I have every day is they're looking for people who have enough of appreciation that they can lead. They're looking for somebody who might want to be more of a technical leader, or maybe have a small team. There's so many opportunities right now that I think if somebody has an interest and appreciation and a willingness to learn, what I'm finding is, the CEO and I have done a couple of joint lectures together, not lectures, really fireside chats, where we've come in and just let students ask questions about jobs in supply chain, and how many of them don't realize the nobility and value of the craft, and what, again, you don't need to be a mathematical mastermind to add value in the space. And so that awareness is, if it doesn't sway somebody to pursue that as a career path, at least they have an understanding, and perhaps, we'll read one more thing or engage in one more conversation about the value of supply chain.
Thank you.
Next question.
Kyle.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for the presentation. I'm also on the practitioner side, and everything completely resonates with me. Same problems. It's risk, right? Like, how do I react quickly? And I need to develop my systems to do that. So within that context, how do you balance the need for some level of standard information that everyone agrees needs to be there, with the flexibility of the individual decision makers and how they can react to that information and their specialized situations?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'll apologize in advance for the bias I'm coming from, given my job. And one of the ways we've done, we've tackled that at Conexus is through this technique of concurrency, and having everyone have not only access and awareness of the same data set, but visibility to the real-time impact of a decision they were going to make. So in considering a what if, through again, the science and algorithms of the team, inspired by many of you in the audience, are able to see the immediate impact and understand, not on a sandbox, not on an hour-old, week-old data, but actually, so it's that elimination of the latency between the nodes in your supply chain from an information flow perspective that'll allow trust, because you actually know the impact of the decision that you're about to make, not just on yourself, but on your peers.
So is this kind of like when you play the beer game and you realize you're only looking right here, and instead you're getting that visibility all the way downstream to that customer signal,
and across all of your upstream signals potentially as well,
right?
Or within, we have multiple products and multiple things going on, and planner A and planner B share some common components, and being able to understand, well, right in this moment, if I did something that's going to shift a product availability to A, it's going to impact, product B. We need to know that. A day-old data is not going to help me. So how do I ensure that I'm making the right decisions for the company, and then considering them from the top line financial, not just the bottom line financial, which I'm amazed how much the conversation has shifted that way. I don't know if you're finding that within Dow. They're talking about, dollars and cents and earnings per share, these types of language. I don't think I've ever heard it so pervasively as I do now.
Yeah, and we're highly driven by working capital, that they want as much cash available as possible. So turning things around faster, it's 40% of our bonus is structured from that, 40% from profit, and then last 20% on ESG targets.
Yeah, interesting. So that's consistent with what I'm seeing.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a question in the chat. It's from Professor Roger Schroeder. How does a supply chain manager handle risk that isn't forecasted from demand, unexpected supply or demand changes?
That's a great question, and I think that's what we've just lived through significantly in the last couple of years. Unexpected demand, supply line open one day, your transportation method is gone the next, and how do you actually prepare for a situation like that? And that's what goes back to this conversation around agility. How quickly can we look at where we are? What is it? How quickly can we change our decisions? How quickly can we use that model to say, what are we? What should we do in this moment to do something differently? And that's what a lot of supply chain leaders are facing right now is, let me read, you don't want it to be just off the cuff, because that's a recipe for disaster. So how can you use as much intelligence to make very quick decisions that are because there was an unexpected disruption or unexpected change? The other thing we're hearing a lot of, and I know that there's been academic conversations about this as well, around the importance of stress testing the supply chain, just so that you can practice if something like this were to happen. Like, how robust is your supply chain model? How dynamic would it be in a circumstance where you had a massive failure in one of your suppliers? The other piece of that equation is, how aware are you of your full supply network? I'm amazed at how many supply chain leaders don't have a good understanding of, their supplier. And that, yes, there could be contractual obligations and things that shield some of this, but just, am I 1% of somebody's demand? Am I 100% of their demand for that widget? Every of my competitors are going to that same supplier? Is that a sole supplier? What does the spot market mean? What does hedging against? What are these things? It's amazing. So again, academic friends, if you want to reach out to the supply chain community and help educate on some of these techniques that allow you to really ensure that you are well protected, both financially and operationally in your supply chain, is to understand that supply network. And there's really an opportunity there for growth and learning, and this community can contribute.
We have one more question in the chat. What are your thoughts on just in case rather than just in time?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of conversations on just in case and just in time. And the just in case kind of speaks to, should you stock up on inventories just in case? And I feel like that can become a very expensive proposition if you don't really consider it carefully. I would rather see, the velocity of information become that trade-off as opposed to stockpiling stuff. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some very critical widget subassembly that's required for your product, but I would be very, very cautious in using that as a strategy. Because you'll find your obsolescence charges, your excess becomes, it starts to grow pretty quickly. And in these days of sustainability objectives, you don't want to be the company that has a lot of extra stuff kicking around just in case. That becomes a very nice garbage pile.
Rakesh, do we have more questions?
I don't see any questions at this
All
time.
I will ask a question. And it is piggyback on the last question, just in case. When we say just in case, is it not the individual's personality and belief which really matter when it comes to just in case? and there may not be any analytical models, mathematical models. We had organized our conference in Orlando, and around September, or October, November, people were still debating whether to have face-to-face or go online, and there was a debate. And the question was, again, just in case. And the people who were planning, the program team, they thought, just in case, let's move to online. Nothing might have happened, and we'll be meeting in Orlando rather than online. So the question is, isn't it important the individual's own personality and beliefs in just in case?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So yes, but what we're speaking about is risk aversion, right? And risk tolerance.
Yeah.
And what did somebody tell me once? Gut feel is just an algorithm that hasn't yet been written down. So while it may be a personal preference, you certainly have a personal algorithm that goes with that could indeed be modeled should you choose to go down that path. As far as supply chain leaders, certainly you have to understand, that risk aversion of your company, but recognize that it could be a double-edged sword in this. I don't know that I can translate it to the conference scenario, but you get in a situation just in case, and you're adding extra inventory. Maybe the demand comes through, maybe there's an issue that you consume it, but also maybe you become tarnished as not an eco-friendly organization. So I was speaking with one company in another professional setting who said, I forget what they called the decisions, but they were essentially like good regardless decisions. If things go up or if things tank, we would still do this. And they were trying to figure out what were those decisions that they would make regardless if their demand flourished or the bottom fell out of it. And they were sort of guiding their path forward based on those so that they could get as close to seeing what was really going to happen as possible.
Okay, thank you. But I believe that personal preferences play a bigger role in making these decisions. Another question which I had, you used the word inspiration, and when you started your presentation, what I could gather, you were talking about inspiration from the practitioners to the researchers and researchers to the practitioners. So that's a group, practitioners and researchers. Are there any inspirations within practice? One organization inspires the other organization?
All the time. All the time. Whether it's looking, I have frequently engaged in certainly in my days of creating the models myself, looking at my marketing counterparts and saying, what are you doing? Looking at our social science counterparts and leveraging their information. Absolutely, we're seeing, or across industry conversations, we bring our customers together because they inspire each other to look at things differently, whether it's different industries considering different ways of solving problems. As I listen to Kyle speak from Dow about working capital optimization, I had flashbacks to my days at Verizon, where that was our Verizon Wireless, where that was our number one goal. And I wondered, I wonder if the chemical company could take some guidance from the telecommunications industry, or maybe they can, I don't know. So I think it happens all the time where you see cross-industry, cross-functional inspiration.
Maybe if they're not in the same industry, in the competing industry.
Oh, well, yes.
All right.
We are almost at 10:15, but we have one more question. I don't know if you want to take it. Real quick, any thoughts on the Long Beach port gridlock issue? Any suggestions to fix that issue?
I'm not sure. I'm sure many of us have pontificated on that. And I don't know that I would necessarily share anything that hasn't been discussed in groups and on the side already. Maybe maybe greater transparency upstream. Maybe there's opportunities for better planning. I spoke with I think it was a toy or a children's clothing manufacturer, somebody like that, who said, they were so stuck at the port that they'd started, like they were building smaller warehouses right by the port so that they could have more immediate release as soon as something was available. I think there's probably many paths, and there'll be many conversations in years to come around how that could have been improved. But yeah, I don't know that I have any other suggestions beyond the discussions that have already happened around cocktail parties and whatnot on that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. It was a wonderful discussion and a wonderful talk. And thank you very much.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the session. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Anne.